Humanitarian crisis in South Sudan. We are joined via Zoom by Yves Willemot, the Chief of Communications of UNICEF South Sudan. Yves, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the Globe.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having me tonight.
Indeed, it is an absolute pleasure, sir. Now, the country is celebrating 10 years of emancipation, but is there a reason to celebrate when the country has one of the world's largest humanitarian and refugee crises with about, 2.2 million South Sudanese refugees and over 1.6 million internally displaced persons?
That is a very valid question. I think after 10 years of independence, it's a good time to make an analysis of where the situation is with children in South Sudan. And as was noted, 4.5 million children are today in need of humanitarian assistance, which is basically 2/3 of the entire child population, which is basically the highest proportion of children in need of humanitarian assistance worldwide. So that is a situation that is not very positive, we have to admit. And it's something that we as UNICEF want to highlight because we want to highlight the fact that it is important for the international community not to turn back on South Sudan and its children, and to make sure that as the country is going through its worst humanitarian crisis, the budget of humanitarian assistance are not cut down, because children in South Sudan more than ever needs these international support to make sure that their rights are being respected.
Yes, it's quite interesting that you raise that point. I mean, is it correct to suggest that this is the most forgotten crisis in the world? And it would seem, as the country has got one of the highest percentages of children in need of humanitarian assistance. I mean, 10% of the children do not reach their 5th birthday in South Sudan.
Well, if you compare the situation in South Sudan with some of the other crises, it is true to say that the situation in South Sudan, unfortunately, is among the worst, if not the worst. You were speaking about the high levels of child mortality, one out of 10 children not reaching its 5th birthday. You were speaking about the crisis with regard to the number of refugees and displacement.
Yes.
We could also refer to the 2.8 million children out of school in South Sudan, which basically is the largest proportion of all children at primary age not being in school, more than 70%. So the crisis in South Sudan is big. The situation, the humanitarian crisis, is dire, and unfortunately, it's probably the most forgotten crisis worldwide, and we need to highlight the urgent need of assistance for the children in South Sudan.
Surely this conflict has pushed the country into an economic freefall, with food and fuel prices skyrocketing and an ever-rising cost of living. This is no doubt an indication that the warring parties do not have the interests of South Sudanese as a matter of priority, isn't it?
Well, maybe we can still highlight the positive point, as you were saying also in your introduction and highlighting in your introduction. The civil war is over in South Sudan since 2018. There is peace in South Sudan. The implementation of the peace agreement has been slow, not as efficiently rolled out as we might have hoped for, but there is peace in South Sudan. Unfortunately, there is a continued violence happening, intercommunal violence, subnational violence, as we call it here, which is creating a lot of displacement inside of the country, and which has as a consequence that a growing number of people do lose access to basic services, services in terms of health, in terms of education, in terms of protection for children. So this is a main issue that needs to be addressed, even though there is an end made at the civil war. There is still a lot of violence happening in the country, and also the country is facing a growing impact of the climate change. We have seen a growing unpredictability of floods and droughts here in the country. Just to give you an idea, the number of people that have been affected by floods last year was above 1 million people. 600,000 were displaced. These figures, we haven't seen them since the 60s. So this has also led to a dramatic impact in terms of children losing access to basic services. So this has to be also addressed, the issue of violence and the issue of being prepared to the impact of climate change here in the country.
And compounding the situation further is the terrain, hampering accessibility to deliver food aid and other forms of aid to the affected communities. I mean, I went through some pictures on your website of some on some aid workers wading through flood waters, carrying goods, carrying food to deliver to the affected communities. And it makes the work of the aid workers very, very difficult, does it not?
Yeah, it is difficult to work in this country because of, as you were saying, the flooding, for instance, the inaccessibility of a lot of areas in the country throughout large parts of the year. And that is also why we are advocating for the international community to continue to make budgets available for humanitarian assistance in South Sudan. We add to that also the importance of timely availability of these budgets. As we speak, the rainy season has started in South Sudan, so we have to rush now and to make sure that while some areas are still accessible, we can pre-position supplies, humanitarian supplies, so that when people become affected by floods, we can actually deliver the support they need while they're being displaced.
And I understand there is the looting of humanitarian supplies. I mean, about 2,000 packages of food have been stolen or looted. That's enough to treat about 2,000 hungry children in South Sudan. So what do you know about this particular incident, and who are the perpetrators of this?
Well, I was referring to that subnational violence and intercommunal violence. Unfortunately, we have seen the last year or so an increase in violence inside the country, which has also affected the humanitarian workers. Unfortunately, we have lost several people last year and already also this year in terms of humanitarian workers that have been attacked, as well as humanitarian supplies have been looted. So we are calling on all people in the country to make sure that security is guaranteed and that the humanitarian actors who are ensuring that people and children in particular can have access to basic services can continue to do their work and continue to do that in full security.
All right, Yves, great chatting to you. Thank you so much for your update.
Thank you so much. Have a very good evening.